it takes a village to raise a child, as they say in Africa. And he said, that's something that's so much ingrained in me. So if I look at the privilege you had in terms of education and the possibilities, for me, I look at the other side and I said, wow, what a poor social kind of background. So it was a very interesting conversation.
Yeah. Did that quote actually come from Africa? Because I swear that's a Hillary Clinton book and quote. Did they say that in Africa first? Is that where she got it? I don't know. I'm going to research that.
That's very African. Sorry, Hillary.
Oh, man. Good to know. Good to know.
Welcome, everyone, to Startup Impact Series. I'm Nick from Breda.
And I'm Fionna Faulk.
Hello and welcome everyone to the 7th edition of Startup Impact Series. Today we are here with someone really special. Actually, none of us knows Dave. Dave is from Buzzwoman, Dave Jongeneelen, and he is actually a big advocate for women entrepreneurship. So we are really curious how he's doing activities in this field of industry, because I have never heard about it. So I'm really curious about Dave and his foundation. So give it a go, Dave. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what Buzzwoman is about.
Yeah, thanks. Well, happy to meet you this way and talk about Buzzwoman, because I just sent one chat when we started and this let's say talk. I told you about how passionate I am about this, and why I'm passionate is because it's a very simple idea, Buzzwomen, because what we do actually is every day we train women in their own environment in emerging markets, developing countries, mostly in India, but also in the Gambia. And the idea is that those women are excluded from education, don't have access, and we kind of swapped the whole thing around and said, well, if they can't go to school, and we bring the school to them. So basically Buzzwomen is all about a school on wheels, and that school is driving into the villages, and that's how the women can leave their home, and right at their doorstep they get access to a kind of transformation process, mostly for the first time in their lives. And that makes me very exciting, because every day we're reaching out to women and we see what happens once they start learning and how eager they are. So that's the short version of a long story.
Yeah, I'm super curious. I'm sure you probably get this question all the time. As a man, what inspired you to be awesome and get involved in this line of work and with this initiative?
Well, I'm amazed myself in a way. Yeah. And in hindsight, when I think about my mom, she passed 2 years ago, and when I think about her story in life, as a kid, she had a big dream of starting her own hair salon. And not the ordinary village salon in the south of Holland, where she was from, in a small village, but she wanted to have the best salon in Paris. That was her dream. Mm-hmm. And what happened was that my grandparents, her parents, they said, well, all this hair and this dirty job, and no way, you can't do this. And you just go to, I think what we would call now a kind of housewife school. So where you learn how to cook and be a proper housewife. And so in a way, she couldn't fulfill her dream. Later, she still started her own shops in a kind of clothing business. So that also showed her strength and her resilience. But at the same time, she never really fulfilled her original dream. And if I fast forward to a moment where I was in my previous company that I founded, I did a leadership program in the Gambia, West Africa. We were in a very dusty village. And during that program, we had a break, and in the break, many people from the community entered our training ground, and they started asking questions about what we were doing, and they were so eager to learn everything. And then I got this sense of, I was wondering, how can we reach those people who are outside the gate? And then especially the women, because they play such an important role in society. Yeah. And I think the women are most excluded. So that's when I got this idea, like, wow, what if we start a school? And then people said, women can't go there because they can't leave their family or their business, or it's too expensive, or the threshold is too high. And then the idea came like, wow, what if we bring the school to them? And that's how the idea originated. And then a few years later, we actually managed to set it up in 2012. And by now, we have trained about 220,000 women. And we established a kind of permanent education system in 5,000 villages in India and in Africa. And we're starting to roll this out also in Georgia and Eastern Europe later this year. So yeah, I don't know how I got into this women's business, but I sure enjoy it.
That's amazing. You've helped train so many women at this point and empower so many women. At what point do you feel, I'm sure when you first came up with the idea, or when you first started, I don't even know if you envisioned, maybe you already had the lofty goals to train hundreds of thousands of women, but I'm curious, at what point do you feel like it really started to catch fire and take off? Because that's a massive amount, and you've affected so many people. What do you feel like was really the impetus behind that catching fire?
I think in the end, it was just first telling people about the idea and finding the right partners in this. Because I was telling people about this idea, and I met one of the founders of a big microfinance company in India. He said, wow, this is the missing link. And then one of his team members said, I know somebody who can run this. And that's Uttara, who is leading Buzz Women now in India. And so that's part. The other one was like, I felt like I had no clue how I should make this financially sustainable, but I knew it was needed and it was a good idea. So I just started off. And I got some friends and family behind me, and they helped me to get it going. And then the third thing was like, I felt like we need to get this first bus running, because until that, it was just an idea, and people were looking at me like a mobile school. And then we had this first bus made, which in the end was too big, too clumsy, got stuck in the mud in every village, but still it was a bus. And then when people saw it and saw it functioning, they said, wow, this is really innovative, really innovative. It's really different. So that's how things started to roll. So I felt like I never had these big numbers in mind when I started. Actually, we said if we can train 20,000 women by 2020, that would be very cool.
Wow.
And I think now you
can double that. You can double that. Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. And you started with a bus, and you figured out that it was going to be stuck in the mud. How did you fix that? There's not like a new road over there, or did you make road as well?
No, I think it's improvising every time. And my basic assumption was not so much about the buses, because I'm not a mechanic or whatever, but it's my assumption was always like when you start developing people, you first focus on their self-confidence and their skills and their capabilities. And then we had this maybe Western idea of a whole curriculum to be built, like a mini kind of, not an MBA, but a kind of business training for people. But then the women said, you go away with your curriculum. We need cash. We are in this survival mode every day. Mm-hmm. And that's what's keeping us busy. And if you can help us to get there, then we are interested in whatever we can learn. Mm-hmm. So that's how we had to test what worked and to make it very practical and accessible for the women. So that's, I think, where most of our energy was focused in the early years, is to keep on testing what is actually working. Mm-hmm. And the last thing we want is to look down at the women or to think we know better. But I think in the end, when we started to listen to the women and their ideas, and that's how the whole kind of program evolved over time. And I think that's the beauty about what we do. It's very simple, but at the same time, I think the thinking behind it, yeah, it's been tested and proved, and yeah, that's.
So is it a certain methodology, or like you say it's so easy, but it sounds so hard, especially in those regions when there is a survival mode going on. How can you empower people to get out of that survival mode?
Good question. I think one is you have to relate to them, and not teach and preach to them. So we ask them many questions about their life, and the training we give, it's like they leave their houses in groups of 30 women. They're trained. Within the first 5 minutes, it's about their own life, about their own money, how they spend it, how they earn it, what happens to them. And we ask them every time questions about how they want to lead their life. For many, it's the first time they've been asked about what's your own dream in life, because they're living a life which is very, let's say, serving other people, never focusing on their own ambitions. So that's, it's amazing to see when you ask that, is a kind of spark that develops, and then they start to think. And at the same time, what is always been amazing to me was like that basic concepts about the difference between let's say having turnover or profit, or how to save money, or to get rid of your debts. Those are eye openers for them, and this training is not a nice to have for them, but it's really about their life, their wallet, their money, their life, the future of their children. So if you see the way they are engaged in this training, I never seen that in any kind of whatever school or corporate setting. So that's the beauty about it. The level of engagement is just crazy.
Yeah, I'm curious about that as well. So a long time ago, also known as late last year, on one of the audio blogs, I posted about microfinance and the micro enterprise. Talked a little bit about how it originated with Grameen Bank being the Kickstarter for microloans and micro lending in India. And what I found in my research was that once microloans really caught on, there seemed to be two different outcomes for the people who received those loans, right? You had the people who were successful and were able to pay them back. And then you had the others who received loans who were not successful, were not able to pay them back, and seemed to go in a downward spiral. The main attributes that I found to be with the ones that were successful and were able to pay them back and continue to flourish seemed to be they had the education, the support, the community to have around one another and rely on each other as a bit of a community check, that everybody was contributing and doing their part and helping one another to make sure they all rose together. That seems to be inherently built into your system, and especially with the hive, I think it said on your website, you've got a bit of a hive. Tell me about how that came about, because obviously it's super important, but how did you end up going in that direction? Because that's the successful direction for my research.
Yeah, well, I think a number of things there. I think one is we felt like we come in with the bus and train them at first instance. And when I launched this idea, the founder of the microcredit organization also said to me, like, this is the missing link, because you can give money to people, but if they don't know how to use it, and if they don't have the entrepreneurial skills or the self-worth underneath to do that. So also in microfinance, you see a lot of the women we train, they actually have a big debt burden. So it's not working for them. And they just have 2 or 3 sources of loans which they cannot escape from. So I think in that sense, microfinance has become a very pushy industry as well.
Yeah.
But that apart, what we felt like the way to make this work is that women need each other to learn. And once they start sharing what's on their minds, they feel, wow, I'm not the only one, and I can learn from my peer group. And what happens with the beehives is that the women are trained in this group of 30 women from their own village. Among them, they choose their own leader. And we call that the anchor woman. And that anchor woman is their role model, their leader. And then after the initial program with the bus, the anchor ladies lead a monthly meeting, and sometimes even more often, with their group of 30 women. And every time they discuss the progress and what's happening, and in that way they stimulate each other to keep on moving forward. And what we also do for the anchor women is a kind of advanced leadership program. We call that an inspiration fellowship, with different modules about making them even more a role model for the other ladies and adding knowledge to that. And every time they get new knowledge, they feed it back to their own group. And then besides that, there's a kind of voice messaging system we use in India that every 2 weeks they get a new story of a role model or a woman that's been introduced in the first training. And she's called Lakshmi, and Lakshmi every time overcomes new obstacles and faces challenges. And then they discuss that in their own group. So that's how this permanent learning system works. And that's I think the strong part about what we're doing.
Yeah, that's nice. That's super nice. I'm also curious. I feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't ask. How have you seen so far? Maybe there are no differences at all, but how have you seen the current situation with the coronavirus and the need to work more remotely, be more digital, et cetera? How have you seen that impact what you're working on, what you're accomplishing, especially in India and some of the lesser developed areas where you have presence?
Yeah, I need to release my cat from before she scratches the door too much.
No problem.
It's getting darker outside.
It is. It is. So nice, though. It's good. Good stuff.
Put on some light as well.
There you go.
Yeah, Corona.
Oh yeah.
It's for me it's mixed. There's the big worry that in countries like India and the Gambia and many countries where the health infrastructure is not as what we're used to, what will happen there. So in the short term, I think there is a big worry about what happens, and also the fear among people. If I look at what Corona means for me, if I reflect more on it, and for me it's like more telling me and people and the world to stand still and reflect a bit about what's happening and where we are. And when I look at that, I feel like, it makes us kind of awake that what we have been doing is not sustainable at all at kind of almost every level.
Yeah.
I think it could also be a kind of liberating effect, because there's no way we can hold on to what we had. And I think it also helps us to connect more deeply as people and to remember how solidarity looks like. And so for me, this whole awakening, liberation part, but also reconnecting, I think that's what Corona brings us. And if I reflect on that, and of course we had that reflection in Buzz Women about what it means, I think it's a similar process what we do with the women, to make them more awake, more connected, to liberate themselves also, I can do this. So the self-confidence that develops from the sessions is great to see. Mm-hmm. And we've been focusing so far, we call it 3 C's. So one is cash. That's the original question of the women. We need to get more cash. The second one was confidence. So everything to do with the self-awareness, skills, the knowledge the women have. The third one is climate, because we felt like climate change, we are talking about it in our parts, about carbon and rising temperatures, etc. And the women we work with, they face it every day because they have no water, they have the soil is degrading, they can't harvest anymore, there's deforestation around them, etc. So we felt like we need to make an integrated model with economy and ecology going hand in hand. So that's what we already were working on. Corona made us even reflect more like about the importance of care, not so much health care in hospital or medical doctors, but self-care and principles of living a healthy life, caring for yourself, your family members, food, hygiene. So that's something we want to add in terms of know-how, because we feel like that basic know-how is something that's missing, especially in countries where the health system is kind of typically weak.
Mm-hmm. Do you work in environments where there's no sanitarian, like bathrooms? There's no clean water. What kind of areas do you typically work right now?
Yeah, I think we work in kind of remote areas, typically where there is no sanitation. Indeed, sometimes there's electricity, but only a few hours a day. If you look at waste management, it's kind of absent. So a lot of the things we take for granted are not there. And at the same time, the less people have, the more I think resilient and in a way connected they are.
Yeah.
So
you feel a tribe that they have a tribe. All of them have a tribe that they can fall back to, like their families and children.
Yeah, I had a discussion with my mentor in the Gambia who helped me to start, on my path in terms of pursuing impact. And we had a discussion about how we had our upbringing, and he accused me of being very socially poor in terms of the way I was brought up. And he said, I cherish so much the community spirit that I have. It takes a village to raise a child, as they say in Africa. And he said, that's something that's so much ingrained in me. So if I look at the privilege you had in terms of education and the possibilities, for me, I look at the other side and I said, wow, what a poor social kind of background. So it was a very interesting conversation.
Yeah. Did that quote actually come from Africa? Because I swear that's a Hillary Clinton book and quote. Did they say that in Africa first? Is that where she got it? I don't know. I'm going to research that.
That's very African. Sorry, Hillary.
Oh man, good to know. Good to know. So question on that. Just maybe last thing on the micro lending. I'm not. I know it's a separate thing to what you're doing. It's a component, so to speak, with partner companies. I'm guessing, right? But I'm curious with everything. With all the stimulus packages that are being given out, and with all of the leniency that we're seeing in terms of mortgages and payments on different needs-based services, what sort of leniency have you seen for paying back the microloans? Because I know that they tend to have to pay them back either on a weekly basis or things like that. What have you seen in terms of leniency for folks in the micro lending aspect of the program?
Well, I don't know that much about that. I've been in touch with India, and they said there's also, like banks do here, that you can delay, let's say, paying off your loans or interest. So I think there's things like that happening. At the same time, I feel the official payback rate is often 99%, but that's also because of peer pressure.
99% when they're in programs like yours.
Well, I'm not sure, because on the back end they have a loan with their neighbor or with a loan shark to repay that loan. They don't want to lose face. So I think there's more behind that. But I think generally, like microfinance has become a kind of industry where a lot of people have been taking loans where they were not ready for that. So that's what we find out in our programs. And we find out that women can do so much more on their own rather than taking any more loans. And I think that's what in the end gives them confidence and also mind space. It's the same for us. If you have a big mortgage here and you're losing your job, there's not a lot of mind space left, because you're just worrying about how you're going to pay your bills.
Definitely.
And I see your report, your impact report, mentions something about traditional financing systems like banks. that you actually offer them an alternative, or at least give them a better option. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how that is set up? Is that set up by you? Is it set up by partners?
We actually don't give them money or loans. What we do is to help the women to better understand the way they manage their business or they use their money. So that's where we kind of help them, but we never are there to give them loans or access, because that's
So it's like the thing, like you can give people a fish, or you can teach them how to fish. You're actually doing the teaching part, and then letting them know that that's a better alternative for the long term.
Yeah, and we also make them reflect on should I be fishing in the first place or doing something else. So I think it's the ideas coming from the women are amazing, and one of the things what we see now, it's what we started in the Gambia, is on that combination between let's say climate and economy. We help the women to, for example, cook in a cleaner way, because there are women groups that make alternatives for firewood by using dried grass or leftovers of coconut. That's the kind of win-win. So you don't spend so much on firewood. At the same time, you help preventing deforestation. So those are things that we typically try to help them with.
Yeah, and is that knowledge, like Dutch knowledge, that we know how to better use less wood, or how do you get all that knowledge? Is that also a lot of data research in that area? And what is that team? Can you tell us a little bit about that team that is behind all of this, together with you?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if I disappoint you, but I think Dutch knowledge is very limited in terms of the way it helps. And I think what does work is seeing what's locally working, what's coming from the women, and trying to make that bigger. So it's not rocket science. It's not like big theories of change or frameworks or anything we use. We use the women as starting point. And if we feel like, wow, this makes sense for the women, then we start helping to spread that to other women and make that grow. So it's really the other way around.
Yeah, I see you.
I had to learn more than I could add in a way in this whole process.
Yeah, that's I think in that different context, in a completely different context, that's always the way. I have to go live together with refugees for 2 years, and I learned so much more than they learned here in the Netherlands from me. I guess it's such a big mind shift that you receive from living in a completely different context with completely different standards. I see you have in the report a huge ambitious goal of training 112,000 women every year onwards to 2025 to reach like 1 million people. That's so much, and I see that you have 12 to 28 trainers. It's like 10,000 people you train with one trainer. Is that real?
Well, one step at a time. I think the ambition is even bigger than that. We said we want to train 10 million women by 2030. And if you look at what's happening in India, well, hoping that Corona doesn't impact everything for too long. But we were planning to scale this year from 10 buses every day on the road to 25. So it means that even alone in India, we would train about 300 to 400,000 women, let's say in a year's time. And for us, Dutchies, that sounds like crazy numbers. For Indians, it's a bit more common. Also looking at how many women there are, we're only working in one state. But even in that state, there are millions of women that are, let's say, the target group for this. Mm-hmm. And I think, we have now about 80, 90 staff, which is also growing fast. And I think the beauty is that, one trainer can reach a lot of women. It's a very kind of efficient system there. But we don't know. I think when we spoke about this ambition, my colleague in India, she said, my knees are shaking, so I'm not sure where we're going. But nowadays she calls me like we said, maybe we need to do 5 million women in India. But she said, I don't want a half target. So I'm pretty sure we can reach 10 million women by 2030.
Wow.
So, and for me, it's the numbers. Again, in the Gambia, they said a beautiful thing. It's we only counting the numbers to make sure that each woman can count on herself. So for me, in the end, it's more about the impact than about the numbers.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it helps to give it a lot of ambition.
Absolutely. And when you say impact, and maybe this is, I technically have one more question, but I know we're getting close to end time here. In terms of impact, could you share with us what you feel like you've seen as an example of the greatest impact, or one of the biggest impacts you've seen in terms of results and change in life circumstance through your program?
I think when I was recently in the Gambia, after one of the sessions, some of the women came to me and they started explaining to me, and they said, Dave, this is the first time in my life that I came to know that I'm not as poor as I always thought I was. And secondly, I also realized that I am the one who can break through this myself. Yeah. And for me, that was one of the best days in my life, because I felt like, wow, that's exactly what you hope that happens.
Yeah.
That kind of awareness, I think that makes this work special. And the gratitude on the other side of the women and their eagerness to learn, but also their huge power and strength, and the way, like they said, they're not living in social poverty. So they have a lot to give to the world. And I feel that's also true. Once you start helping a woman to develop, she pulls the whole system along. That's also what we see. The husband gets energized and excited about her growth, whereas we expected a lot of resistance. We see the kids taking part of the sessions. So I think that's the beauty about what we do. And that's also the simplicity, that it's one woman at a time. But once she starts to realize that she can break through this and do it, I think that's how it works.
And it's on your report, you also mentioned 20% of the women are becoming entrepreneurs, and that's so much more than we have here in the Netherlands. I'm so curious, how is it possible that when everyone has everything over here, that maybe only 5% of the ladies here choose to become an entrepreneur, and then over there it's 1/5 of the women that actually are becoming an entrepreneur, when there is no access to education, no social healthcare system, none of that, and I'm really curious about how is that related to like our systems that we all have in place.
Yeah, I think the lack of system creates also necessity for them to be an entrepreneur. So if they're not an entrepreneur, they can't get a job or access any kind of paid work. So in a sense, it's not the chosen path of entrepreneurship. We found out that from the, let's say, 200,000 women we trained, about 2/3 of them, yes, they are a very small scale entrepreneur, but that's more to survive and get money. And once they feel like, if I can lead my life and I have enough income to save a bit and to take care of my kids, I'm fine. But 1/3 of the women has a lot of ambition to grow their own business and to accelerate that business. And we have a separate program for that. It's called Buzz Business. But that's, we would call it an incubation program or something fancy like that. Yeah. And for them, it's just like moving on and getting to the next level. I think there's a lot of creativity out there. And also on the African side, people think Africa is maybe less entrepreneurial or more dependent. I totally disagree. There's so much entrepreneurship there at all levels.
Mm-hmm. Definitely agree.
So having less means more entrepreneurship, more creativity, and definitely more sense of feeling in a social tribe, and like more sense of belonging, perhaps to having a beautiful life.
Yeah, and in that sense, we are kind of now taken aback because our system starts to collapse and now we have these short-term measures where our system is kind of helping us, but in a way postponing maybe some of the problems. Mm-hmm. In India or in the Gambia, they don't have that problem because they don't have a system like that. Right. So, yeah.
Exactly. Well, I'd say let's go ahead and wrap up since we are definitely running out of time. What's one, if you could impart one bit of wisdom on the folks watching this in terms of how you would go about achieving your, your social dream, your social entrepreneurship dream, what would you give them as advice?
I think take as much time to reflect as time to act. I think entrepreneurship and startups are, I think, wrongly associated with this go-get-em mentality and do and work like crazy. For me, it feels like if you take time to reflect and pause and listen to yourself and see what's happening around you, it makes so much more sense. So it's not doing all the things at the same time, but it's doing the right things. And so I think if you can keep that calm somehow, and things are happening for a reason or not happening, and everything has their own time. So I think, you need to be as much philosophical about it as practical. And I think that's my advice, because I see a lot of people that start to rush or running behind their own kind of models and ideas. And I think it's much better to allow yourself to have some time. And from there, what I've noticed over time is then, suddenly somebody said then your path forward seems to light up. It's the moment you start to pause. So I think the Corona, time maybe also helps us collectively to do that. Yeah. But I think it's also true for entrepreneurs.
That's really interesting. For those who are listening, they are probably thinking about their own social venture right now, especially to tackle a local or a regional or a country level problem right now, and maybe feeding their neighbor who is elderly or whatever. I'm really curious because you are a foundation and we haven't spoken about a business model or anything like that. And I'm really curious, you're working so much on social capital, you're giving away so much. How do you create a sustainable business model in such a philanthropical business?
For me, if you've asked me 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I always said you have to have a business model. And I became a little bit skeptical. If the impact is there, money will come your way, whatever it's called. That's one. Two is what happens is that we have now 220,000 women who have been trained. One of the women who was in our first training group came to us last year. She said, let me give you a donation so that you can train another woman. And we asked all the women if they want that, and they said yes. And it costs us only €5 to train one woman in the system we have. So imagine if we have 200,000 and maybe in a few years' time, 1 million women paying €5, how much cash flow you generate from inside. So I think that's how business models start to evolve over time as well. As long as the impact is there, people will support you. And we've taken our time to develop into a kind of business model which is sound and gives us space, but it's not a goal in itself. And I find most of the time it's the business model that and the whole thinking about that kills so much creative and good ideas. So I would definitely go the other way. And if the impact is right, the money will follow, not the other way.
Yeah. So maybe you can talk to finish off with like how that measurement helps you in making sure you become sustainable, like measurements of impact.
It doesn't. It's if I'm very honest, the whole measurement thing is more for the outside world. Of course, you want to have proof of what you do, but I think the belief and seeing it happen every day is for me more important. And I think, you need to connect the measurement part, but also with the kind of intuition that you have, that what you do makes a lot of sense. And I feel like sometimes all this measurement takes us away from the essence of what we do. So for me, I like measurement because it gives you proof of impact. But the measurement shouldn't lead to the way you do your things. I believe.
Mm-hmm. So 90 people running the business, or 80 people running the business, and it's still going strong and it's going faster and faster. Yeah, I'm really happy that we had this interview, Dave. I'm super glad we had you here tonight. And I want to wrap off with this. I definitely want to get a cup of coffee when there's a possibility to do so. But for now, we stay indoors. For now, we will look at how the countries are running themselves and how your women are making an impact over there.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Amazing.
Take care.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.